Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 161, The Construction of the Fortress. On the battlefield, morale can lead to an absolute victory or defeat. This saying is absolutely correct. It can be called the truth. Because it had been proven in history that troops with low morale simply could not compete with troops with high morale. If the two sides were to engage in a decisive battle, even if the troops with high morale had fewer people and poorer equipment, they could still easily defeat troops with low morale, better equipment, and large numbers. And Kant now had in control of this mysterious morale. He currently had two great items. Intimidation was used to lower the enemy's morale, while commanding power was used to raise their morale. When these two items buffing each other, their troops would become invincible. This was the reason why he was excited. Although the loyalty of the recruits was enough, it was a constant loyalty. However, with their own personalities, habits, and thoughts, their morale was not always at constant status. This was because they would also be afraid, scared, and nervous. Hence, when they faced with the enemy's violent attacks, they would definitely not willing to sacrifice their life if the casualties were high. They would also choose to flee like ordinary people, but the result would be the complete collapse of their defensive line, thus, they would lose a certain crucial battle. Hence, Kant had always placed great importance on the morale of the troops. He looked at the horn on the table. Very good, Kant smiled. This problem had been solved. Mind communication system. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Kant made up his mind. He wanted to turn all the reward he had just drawn into reality. After all, the remaining 21 golden cards were still floating quietly in his mind. In an instant, the familiar view of God reappeared in Kant's eyes. He once again arrived at the 20-meter high altitude of the Oasis lookout. First was the building card. Stable, military building. A shed made of stone and wood, which can shelter the horses from the wind and rain, providing a more comfortable environment. However, this building can only store horses and does not have the ability to nurture warhorse or provide excellent studs. Tavern, economic building. The craftsman built the stone well and carefully processed the woods. The building was built into a two-story building. Tables and chairs were placed, and alcohol-type drinks and food were prepared, so that people could drink freely in it during their leisure time. Remark: economic building can charge dinar for its interior. Linen workshop, economic building. This small workshop does not look big, it is just a small wooden shed. The attentive peasant women are busy inside, and after processing the flax bales, they then process it into high-quality linen cloth. Salt workshop, economic type building. This is a workshop that covers an area of 500 square meters. The neatly cut stone slabs are arranged into whole pieces, and they have been treated with anti-seepage treatment to prevent damages when drying the salt. Stone paving road, civil building. Neat stones are laid together to form 3 meters wide road. It can extend to a very long distance. If it exceeds the required distance, it will cost extra 10 dinars per meter to build. These were the 5 most basic buildings. Kant narrowed his eyes slightly. He built the stable next to the East City Gate to store the warhorse of the heavy cavalry and light cavalry. In an emergency, these cavalries could immediately get on their horses and rush out through the city gate. The linen workshop and salt workshop were built in the crafts area on the west side, which was close to the sugar workshop. As for the tavern, Kant looked at the introduction and thought deeply. If he charged dinar internally, wouldn't he be able to open the tavern and let people spend money to earn dinar? Just like the tavern in the game, if he wanted to drink, he had to pay. Not bad, Kant chuckled. He built the tavern at the junction of the residential area and the military area. It was located at the east end of the Council Hall Road and could be built close to the camp of the Desert Bandits. Hold on the road construction first. Kant thought carefully and did not directly choose to build a road. Although according to the introduction, he could completely rely on this system road to build a pathway from the Oasis lookout to the natural salt mine or directly to the Posthouse. In the future, it would be a huge leap to the trade caravan's progress. But that was for the future. Kant's current principle was to develop in secret. The road leading directly to the Posthouse was easy to expose himself, and the road leading from the Oasis lookout to the natural salt mine would expose the location of his salt mine. Although he was not afraid of the enemy's attack, it would be good to have less trouble. Development was the absolute principle. Moreover, Kant had a camel farm. He bought more than 10 camels to form a camel caravan. The speed of traveling in the desert was not slower than the speed of traveling on the road. Therefore, he was not in a hurry to build the road, but to build the buildings in the fortress first. It was thanks to the city planning that he had prepared beforehand. Now Kant was not worried about the location of the construction. Instead, he seemed to be in good order and not in a mess. This was also the same for the agricultural area and the animal husbandry area. The 25-acre date palm jungle was connected to the previous 5-acre date palm jungle. It was like a sand-blocking forest on the north side. Lush green patches appeared there. The date palm tree was tall and straight, and the greenery that had not been seen for a few days was restored. It gave people joy and happiness, because the cluster of small flowers under the palm leaves proved that these date palm trees were in the flowering and pollination period. As if sensing the scent of pollen, in the fortress, groups of desert bees suddenly flapped their wings and flew out, happily diving into the forest that was filled with the sweet scent of date palm. Before long, the sweet date palm honey would appear in the honeycomb waiting to be harvested. The 50-acre wheat field was also connected to the 7.5-acre wheat field. However, the previous 7.5-acre wheat field belonged to the sandy soil of the Oasis lookout. Only the seeds produced by the system were used, so the growth cycle was also very long. At least more than a month had passed, but there were no signs of sprouting. The wheat field produced by the system was different. They were materialized in the real world. The green wheat seedlings were swaying on the fertile soil. The slight greenery of wheat seedlings matched with the lush greenery of the date palm forest. It curled up slightly under the midday sun, making it look pitiful. The 50 arcs of wheat fields were already quite huge. In fact, with the 30 arcs of date palm jungle, the size of the agricultural area was almost twice that of Trondheim. To the north of the city wall, rich crops were growing. At a glance, from the bottom of the city wall to the sand dune in the distance, it was completely the territory of date palm forest and wheat fields. The sand layer had completely disappeared and was replaced by the standard fertile soil, the kind of excellent land that could grow crops. The systematic field was self-organized. Kant had long known this. Materialization in this world would change the structure of the land itself. Just like now, from sand to soil, it was like the fertile soil was dug out of nowhere, and exchanged with same volume of sand in here. Even the pastures in the livestock area were the same. On the west side of the lake, the grass beach extended to 20 acres, and the waist-height grass was very dense. At the same time, in the southwest direction of the lake, the 20 arcs alfalfa grass pasture, also known as the king of forage grass, was also established there. Both types of forage grass were high-quality forage grass that could be fed to livestock, especially alfalfa grass. It was well-nourished and could be fed to war horses without any problems. As long as it was combined with a little beans and bread, the physical strength of warhorse would not decrease due to improper feeding. On the contrary, it would become stronger and more handsome. If a cow that was producing milk wanted to produce a large amount of milk every day, feeding alfalfa grass was the best choice. From this, it could be seen that alfalfa grass was extremely nutritious. Flax field. Kant looked at the last piece of agricultural field and placed it on the north side of the lake. These flax seedlings could become flax when they grew up. The harvested flax bundles could be used as raw materials for weaving. After being processed, they would form flax fibers. After being carefully woven, it would become a top-grade linen. As for flax seeds, they could be pressed for oil. Currently the oil that eaten by the people in Trondheim fortress was made from the fat of the sand gazelle, or the lard from the Rivaden caravan. As for vegetable oil, it was quite difficult to obtain. However, Kant didn't have a press oil workshop. If he wanted to eat flax oil, he still needed to wait and see if the system's reward would appear. There's also the Anger Camp. Kant's eyes lit up. This was a building that was independent of the original battle group. It was from the game, Prophecy of Pender. It was the troop class system of the Ravenstern Kingdom. The archer troop class was recruited by this building and they had their own abilities. Ranger Camp, Military Building. This was the training camp that the Ravenstern Kingdom had set up in the Misty Mountains. They are the guardians of the northern border. These rangers received training here. Every week, 10 Ravenstern Rangers are available for recruitment. The recruitment fee is 60 dinars per person. The system directly popped out an introduction of the Ranger camp in Kant's vision. Clear and detailed. However, these Rangers, being a level 4 troop class, were actually 10 dinars more expensive than the same level 4 troop class, Viegier's archers. Kant thought about it careful. These Rangers were good at fighting in small groups. They were more powerful and had extremely high accuracy. They were indeed slightly stronger than Viegier's archers. After all, the archers of the kingdom of Viegirs were the strongest only after they formed into certain scale. The two countries had different concepts of how archers were used. Of course, none of them who was stronger or weaker. Only if the troop class coordinated well, and whose archers were more able to deal with the enemy's attack. After all, Viegir's archers who were used to fighting on the snowy plains and grasslands, or on the plains, they definitely could not be compared to the Ravenstern Rangers who were used to fighting in the deep mountains and forests. Each of them had their own strengths and weaknesses. Kant thought in his heart. This ranger camp was built next to the Viegir's shooting range. It was also close to the direction of the city wall stairs. The two buildings provided 10 archers per week for recruitment. As long as there was any situation, Kant could directly recruit these archers to fill the current shortage of archers on the city wall. Chapter 162, Rules of the Special Gift Pack. Buildings were built quickly because of prior planning. The next special gift pack that involved rules was easier to use because it did not require too much of planning. After all, changing the rules directly was the job of the system. Kant glanced at the special gift pack that was still listed on his retina. After pondering for a short while, he made up his mind. He communicated with the system and ordered in a solemn voice, directly use the refugee wave and the immigration wave. The system followed his thoughts. In his mind, the two cards with countless human figures on them suddenly shattered into countless streams of light. It was still the same old place. On the east side of Oasis Lookout, behind the dune, 500 refugees in ragged clothes and 500 immigrants in neat clothes were walking towards the dune in big and small packs. The two were clearly separated, but there was not much of a gap between them. Viegir's archers on the arrow tower quickly discovered that so many strangers were approaching. Following the urgent shouts, 40 elite desert bandits led 70 desert bandits and rushed out of the city gate. They raised their spears and machetes and quickly approached the dune. They blocked in front of these 1,000 people, but they did not attack. After asking, they confirmed that they were refugees and immigrants who had come to seek refuge with Lord Kant. They simply let them pass on the spot. After all, they were all on the same side, so there was no need to make things difficult for them. Kant saw it clearly from the god's view. At the same time, he also saw that in the direction of the city gate, Phyrantus was talking to an unfamiliar middle-aged man. Kant looked carefully and he knew that this was the hero pack that he had obtained previously, James. A doctor from the continent of Caradia. Perhaps he was the best doctor. There was no doubt about it, especially in terms of surgery. After all, he was able to open the patient's skull for treatment in the Middle Ages. Not only did ordinary doctors not have the courage, they probably did not understand surgery too well. And according to Kant's understanding of him, surgery, treatment, and first aid, James could be considered as a soldier's savior. In the game, with James as a full-time doctor, the casualty rate of soldiers could be reduced by half. He had great skills. After all, Kant had 3 heroic NPCs. Phyrontus was in charge of commanding the cavalry, Manad was in charge of making money from the trade caravan, and James was in charge of treating the wounded. At the moment, it seemed that the combination was very reasonable. Kant was also satisfied with this. At the same time, he scanned the golden card in his mind and chose a new one. He contacted the system and activated it. Use terrain modification to create a lake. The card instantly shattered. The golden data flow began to spread. Kant had previously drawn the special reward of this terrain modification, lake, so he was very familiar with how to use similar magic ball rules. At the same time, he quickly made a decision in his mind. The new lake was also 80 meters long, 30 meters wide, and about 3 meters deep. The 2 lakes were connected to each other, moving in a north-south direction. The narrow and long waters just happened to occupy the sand dune plain where the Oasis lookout was located. Although there were dune all around, the new lake could already extend to the end of the 50 acres of wheat fields and 30 acres of date palm tree. It was convenient for irrigation when the canal was built in the future. The appearance of a large number of fields also meant a large amount of irrigation. Especially in the desert where there was a large amount of evaporation, irrigation was needed at any time and place. Otherwise, the tender seedlings would be directly burned to death by the sunday. This was not a joke in the desert. After all, Kant's agricultural area had not been developed in time, and all of them had been burned to death because of his poor management, resulting in no harvest. Although no one laughed at it, Kant himself could not stand it. He would not let such a situation happen to him. Build the canal. Kant did not say anything and directly chose to rebuild the canal. After paying 100 dinars, the construction team from Sunno also appeared at the dune. According to the usual practice, the canal would be completed in 7 days. It would irrigate all 50 acres of wheat fields and 30 acres of date palm forest, as well as the 10 acres of flax fields. Because Kant had drawn a spring before, large amount of spring water poured into the underground water network, so the Oasis lookout had no shortage of water resources. Use, growth of all living things. Kant said in a deep voice, his voice slightly grave. The golden card shattered into pieces, and the data stream instantly surged out like a huge dragon. It exploded like a sprinkling, and countless tiny data streams fell down, slowly covering the entire Oasis lookout. It was like a gentle wind and rain, brushing past the vegetation. But when the vegetation and fields absorbed the tiny data streams, the original greenery became even more obvious. It was like some mysterious force was stimulating the vitality of these plants. And in just a few seconds, the 5 arcs of chi grass beach that had been completely harvested previously was sprouted and took shape again. The rich chi grass once again appeared in the grass beach, almost exactly the same as before it was harvested. The most amazing thing was the 5 acres of date palm jungle that had only a wooden stake left. At the top of the wooden stake, data streams were attached. Date palm trees sprouted from the bottom to the top, followed by long palm leaves. Under the leaves were young branches full of date flowers, as well as small date fruits that could be faintly seen on them. It was truly the growth of all living things. Kant's eyes were filled with shock, but he quickly recovered. He had been shocked too much today. Double the number of recruits, permanent camp of the desert bandits. Kant continued to give orders, level up, permanent council hall. The system quickly responded. Kant had used double the number of recruits in the past, and it was also permanent in the desert bandit camp. And now, by continuing to maintain this kind of rule, the number of recruits doubled. It directly increased to 40 desert bandits per week, which was almost 160 people per month. It was enough to form a cavalry unit. The role of these light cavalries was brilliant in the previous battles. scouting, harassing, and following the charge of the heavy cavalries, as well as the post-war cleanup work. All of them completed the jobs perfectly. Therefore, Kant had high hopes for these low-level light cavalry soldiers. Although their close-range combat ability was really not good, they had high mobility. They could display their full potential, and became the best cavalry. When charging into battle, the Swadian heavy cavalries would naturally be in charge. The option of level up was a special gift pack to speed up the nurturing of high-level footmen. Level up, Council Hall, a mysterious power condenses within it. The power of rules is contained within the golden light. Attribute: Swadian recruit recruited by the Council Hall can be directly upgraded to Swadian militia. Kant read the introduction and nodded slightly. As the central building of the fortress, the Council Hall had both administrative and military capabilities. Recruiting a Swadian recruit for the Lord was also an important special effect. However, the Swadian recruit was no longer able to keep up with Kant's pace of battle. Or it could be said that even the militia was the same. Compared to the weak Swadian recruits, these Swadian militia who had hunting crossbow, heavy spear, and equipped with iron scale armor and wooden shields were enough to solve some of the problems. At the very least, they were much better than the Swadian recruit. Looking at the remaining 3 gift packs, Kant narrowed his eyes slightly, his expression slightly solemn. Council Hall, Level Up, Harvest Week. Kant understood that the first 2 were the key to developing a village again, and the guarantee to let the current Trondheim develop into a real castle. According to his current plan, they were 2 special gift packs that would not be touched. Kant still needed to carefully plan the location of the village to be built. And to develop it into a castle, he still needed to complete the construction of all the buildings. The use of these 2 gift packs was temporarily postponed. Harvest Week. Kant looked at the last special gift pack with a puzzled expression. The system gave an introduction. Harvest Week, this card contains mysterious rules and powers. After use, the crops can immediately mature and harvest this week, allowing the owner of the crops to obtain a bumper harvest. I see, Kant understood. In layman's terms, it was directly allowing the crops to undergo the process of sprouting, blooming, bearing fruit, and maturing within a week. He could only shake his head at this. The changes from the system's rules were truly invincible. In the Academy of the Dukedom of Leo, Kant had once heard about the secret matters of mages, especially in other dukedom where there was a druid sect that advocated the nature. They were good at helping the development of agriculture. It was said that they could make crops sprout and grow quickly, but it was impossible to make such a large-scale change. There aren't many who can compete with the system, right? Kant smiled. This was his cheat. It was also equal to his ability, not inferior to those mysterious mages who stayed in the mage tower all day long. Compared to the so-called extraordinary power, Kant was more confident in how many elite troops he had. After all, a large number of troops formed by these ordinary soldiers, even extraordinary power had to bow in front of the army. At the very least, he knew that these mages were not invincible. Even when the Dukedom of Leo began to wage war, the Grand Duke of Leo, Cameron, could summon those mages with mysterious extraordinary powers to attack with the army and use them as a powerful force. If the mages were really strong, how could the magical beasts, darkness, and some mages from the D&D series bow their heads in front of the secular king? In a low magic-oriented world, an army formed by ordinary people was still strong enough to make the extraordinary powers bow their heads. In a sense, an elite troop was even more precious than extraordinary powers. Kant thought of the Dukedom of Leo and couldn't help but think of his cooperation with Baron Dillon at the Stone Pass. He hadn't traded table salt for nearly 3 weeks, and the Baron was probably impatient of waiting. After settling the current matters, perhaps it's time to make a trip to the Stone Pass. Kant made up his mind. However, looking at the dialogue box that popped up automatically in his vision, the corner of his mouth curled up into a smile. Can all of the troop class be leveled up? In my opinion, this is really worth looking forward to. The dialogue box of troop class popped out from the system. After experiencing this double-rated epic victory and legendary comment, Kant's soldiers had obtained a lot of experience points. It was more than enough to level up for all the soldiers. Chapter 163, The latest data interface. The system displayed the interface of the troop class on the retina. The soldiers in Trondheim had just been through a battle and won. Therefore, the experience points they received was definitely enough to level up, and it was even possible for them to level up consecutively. Except for 10 Swadian militiamen who were responsible for guarding the Posthouse, they did not receive experience points. The rest of the troop class that had not yet reached the top level could all level up. Level up. Kant communicated with Mind Communication System directly and gave the order. There was no need to be long-winded. Since all the troop class's experience was sufficient, Kant would not be petty spending his dinars. Ding system prompt. All troop classes level up, a total of 36,510 dinars. Yes/no? The system immediately popped up a dialog box. Choose to pay. Kant had a lot of savings at the moment, obviously he did not hesitate. Along with the crisp sound of metal coins colliding, the number of dinars in his mind immediately decreased. The data flow spread. Outside the council hall, many troops that were still waiting for orders and cleaning up the battlefield were instantly covered by this data flow. In just a short moment, these troops that were scattered along with the data flow had undergone an earth-shaking change. Their bodies became sturdy, and their weapons and equipment were completely new. It was an earth-shattering change. The Swadian militia received the most experience points after they desperately defending against the enemies and led to severe casualties. The remaining 188 militiamen skipped the level 3 troop class light footmen, and were directly promoted to a level 4 Swadian heavy cavalry. This was as expected. It was these level 2 militiamen who had risked their lives to stabilize the defense line when they were defending against the Jackalans' attack on the city walls and city gates. If they had not fought to the death, once those crazy high-level Jack-Allan charged in, there would be unimaginable consequences. At the same time, the 50 Swadian footmen stationed behind the city gates had received the strongest attack from the high-level Jack-Allan. They had paid the price of 37 deaths. The remaining 13 footmen had all been upgraded to a level-up Swadian sergeants. They had become the most well-equipped and luxurious level-up 5 footmen in the entire kingdom of Swadia, or in other words, the continent of Karadia. It was not just the footmen. The archers who had stubbornly resisted on the city walls and arrow towers had also changed greatly. All 63 of the Viegir's archers had been upgraded to 63 marksmen who held the Viegir's battle bow. They wore mail armor and wore a pot helmet on their heads. Their faces were resolute, and they had the power of level 5 archers. They were no weaker than the Raven Turn Rangers who were also level up 5 archers. As for the Swadian crossbowmen who had suffered heavy losses on the city walls, the remaining 10 of them had all been upgraded to Swadian snipers. They were all level 5 archers. Although they held heavy crossbows in their hands, their power was weaker than the snipers of the Kingdom of Rodux. However, their rich experience over a long period of time had allowed them to have their own style of fighting among the level-up 5 archers. At the very least, in terms of long-range sniping experience and skills, these Swadian snipers were no weaker than those Rodux sharpshooters. This was a qualitative change in the army. It also included the last sweep, the cavalry, which completely destroyed the enemy's morale. 87 Swadian heavy cavalries had used up tens of thousands of dinars just to level up, but the result was 87 terrifying Swadian knight. They wore double layers of heavy chain mail, and even their strongest warhorse wore heavy chain mail from the top to bottom. Their lower chest and abdomen were covered by the chain armor until their calves. They were the strongest heavy cavalry that had never met any enemy on the plains. Including the previous 10 Swadian knight, Kant now had 97 heavy armored tanks that were made of steel in the age of cold weapons. It meant that they were invincible in this age of cold weapon. The only one that could be compared to these knights was the Mamluk of Saran Sultanate. They were the king of steel in the desert. They were better at using two-handed iron staffs to fight in close combat. The 40 original Sarandian horsemen were all upgraded to Mamluks. Kant's absolute trump card. The 97 Swadian knights were invincible in a frontal charge. The 45 Mamluks charged into the enemy's formation and fought efficiently. The 120 Sarandian horsemen could also be considered heavy cavalry. They were all wearing Sarandian chain armor and holding a military spear. The only drawback was that the Sarandian horsemen didn't have any armor, and it was only covered with linen. This was the consecutive level up of 40 elite desert bandits and 70 desert bandits. In the current battle sequence, the complete light cavalry unit had temporarily disappeared, but they didn't need to wait too long. The desert bandit camp now had 40 desert bandits per week. As long as Kant had enough dinar, they could quickly reappear in this vast desert. The current Trondheim fortress was no longer the same as before. No force could be like Kant. Even if they had gone through a brutal battle, as long as they could forcefully hold on and obtain victory, it would be a rebirth for his stronghold. They wouldn't just blindly exhaust their strength and cause casualties from both other. Kant had cheat. In the true sense, Kant could use battle to nourish the battle. Just like after this battle, the Trondheim fortress had entered a new stage of development. According to Kant's speculation, by the end of this month, he could even complete the construction of all the buildings and completely upgrade the fortress to a castle. He already had a pass to level up. Among the special gift pack that he had obtained from the lottery, the level up, castle, card was still floating quietly in his mind. As long as he completed the construction of all the buildings, this originally simple fortress would immediately be upgraded to a castle. It would become a regional building that could truly defend a strategic location. Kant narrowed his eyes slightly. The dialog box on his retina quickly refreshed. He was excited. He calmed his emotions and ordered the system in a deep voice, "Open the data interface." Ding, the data interface is opening. The system immediately replied. On Kant's retina, a new data interface appeared. Trondheim. Lord, Kant. Balance, 112,520 dinars. Reputation, 13,700. Honor, 0. General, Firentis, Manad, James. Type, Swadian Fortress. Current population, 1,050. Building, Council Hall, Fortress Class, House, 50, Tavern, Bell Tower, Grocery Store, Sugar Workshop, Salt Workshop, Linen Workshop, Training Ground, Mill, Fence, Well, Canal, Post House, Stone City Wall, City Gate, Arrow Tower, Desert Bandit Camp, Ranger Camp, Viegier's Shooting Range, Camel Farm, Stable. Constructions available: Barracks, City Walls, City Gates, Arrow Towers, Weapons Workshops, Cells. Level Up, Training Ground. Construction Pack, Paved Roads, Council Hall, Village. Agricultural Resources, Date Palm Jungle, 30 mu, Wheat Fields, 50 mu, Chi Grass Beach, 20 mu, Alfalfa Grass Fields, 20 mu, Flax Fields, 10 mu. Animal Husbandry, Single Humped Camel, 10, Desert Bee, 5 hives, Sand Grouse, 50. Current Troops, Swadian Militia, 10, Swadian Sergeant, 13. Swadian Knight, 97, Swadian Heavy Cavalry, 188, Mamluk, 45, Sarandian Horsemen, 120, Ravenstern Ranger, 7, Viegier Marksman, 63, Swadian Sniper, 10. Recruitable, Swadian Militia, Council Hall, 40 Desert Bandits /Week, Desert Bandit Camp, 10 Ravenstern Rangers /Week, Ranger Camp, 10 Viegier's Archers /Week, Viegier's Shooting Range. Comment: in this barren desert oasis, the Trondheim fortress stands tall. It seems to be in good condition. The clear spring water flowed into the lake, and then through the canal, it nourished hundreds of arcs of land. The people living in the fortress were busy with smiles on their faces. Their movements were light and skilled. They could find jobs here and make a living from it. The city wall was strengthened by the attic, and the arrow towers were neat and perfect. The city defense was well arranged, and elite soldiers were stationed on top of it to guard it. This was a vibrant fortress, and it had a great future. But what was worth noting was that there were very few women in the fortress. Remark, not included in the statistics. Looking at the data on the system interface, Kant smiled, and his eyes were filled with self-satisfaction. In the final comment of the system, there were no sarcastic words. Instead, it fully affirmed the development of the fortress. This represented the success of Kant's military-oriented development path. The military development would lead to the continuous development of the estate. With sufficient self-protection ability, they could use this power to safely develop agriculture or the economy. Dang dang dang! There was a light knock on the door. Swadian sergeant in double-layered chain armor stood outside. With only 13 people left, they did not go to the defense of the city wall. Instead, they stayed alone in the council hall as Kant's personal guards. They also served as daily messengers. "My lord, dinner has been prepared in the kitchen downstairs. I wonder if you have time to participate in the celebration banquet." "Of course I have time," Kant replied. He turned his head to look out of the window. The sunlight was no longer fierce, and the shadows of dusk could already be seen in the horizon. He stood up, opened the door, and walked down the stairs. Even the hall was filled with the fragrance of food. After he walked out, the streets were filled with tables full of various of food. It seemed like they not concerned about the cost. Even the black pepper and white salt that was dipped in food were mixed in small plates. Anyone could eat these precious luxury condiments. The peasant women were busy, and the new civilians were also helping. Manad was arranging the command. At the top of the attic not far away from the city wall, Phyrantus and James were standing side by side, leading a team of Viegier's marksmen on patrol. They were sizing up the situation outside, looking extremely cautious. "This is good, isn't it?" Kant had a smile on his face. This was his estate. Chapter 164, The end of the month arrived in the blink of an eye. Time flew by, and 3 weeks passed quickly. It was the end of the month. Oasis Lookout was still busy, but it was full of vitality. The civilians were busy in the agricultural area and the livestock area on the north side. No one could relax, but no one complained about such days. Instead, they wore happy smiles on their faces, full of love for the construction of their home. They were full of energy. At the celebration banquet, Lord Kant, the lord of this place, promised Trondheim would not mistreat any of its citizens. This statement was said by my lord himself. It was absolutely authoritative. The civilians who had been plagued by exploitation and war in the continent of Karadia gave an absolute applause. That was why they treated the Oasis Lookout as their home and worked diligently. Moreover, this was the land of miracles. Lord Kant's reputation was spread throughout the continent of Karadia. Under the praises of the bards, everyone knew that he was a young, benevolent, and philosophical lord. Even the noble would be awestruck when they heard his name, thus, they would never deceive ordinary civilians like them. And when they came here, they also noticed Kant's kindness. Because these civilians only needed to pay 1 dinar per week for the head tax. They were usually given food, drink, and accommodation. In Karadia, those greedy nobles would not care about the lives of the civilians in their own estate. They were so greedy that they would break the bones and suck their marrow. They only knew how to levy all kind of taxes, and then expand their army to build stronger troops to plunder other lords. Or they responded to the king's call and attacked the territories of other kingdoms. May God bless Lord Kant. Thinking of this, the civilians who were still busy with farm work prayed in their hearts. It was rare to see such a good lord. At this moment, Kant was walking in the attic of the city wall. Inside, the Viegier's marksmen who were scattered in the city wall and the arrow tower came to Kant respectfully and bowed to him. They did not put on the airs of a level 5 troop class and were unusually complimentary to Kant. "Did you find anything unusual?" They came to the top of the arrow tower in the northeast corner. Kant stood within the 10-meter tall arrow tower, looking at the continuous dune to the north. The marksman behind him replied, "No, my lord, everything is normal." "Very good." Kant nodded, and at the same time, exhorted, "Keep an eye out for me." "Yes," the marksman replied. Although they had defeated the expedition army of the Kingdom of Greymane and sold all the captives as slaves, basically wiping out these Jacacalans from the Mannheim coast, they still had to be vigilant. Who knew if those high-level Jack-Allen would continue to send people over? After all, the Kingdom of Greymane on the Mannheim coast was an independent kingdom. Sending people over to inquire about the results of the expedition army was very simple. There was also the most crucial point. Manad, 31 humped camels, and a camel team of 20 desert bandits had already gone deep into the Naran desert to collect coarse salt from the natural salt mines. It had been 3 days, and they should be back soon. The speed of 1 humped camels in the desert was not inferior to that of desert horses. Kant spent 20,000 dinars to buy the other 21 humped camels, which were similar to the previous 10 camels. They were all boats of the desert, elves that could walk briskly among the dune. Moreover, their ability to carry things was even more outstanding. "There's a situation." Kant was just about to walk down the arrow tower. At the same time, the sharp-eyed Viegier's marksman who was looking into the distance noticed something. After careful identification, he immediately reported, "In the north, Mr. Manad's camel team has returned." "Hey!" Kant also turned his head to look. After passing through the lush 30 acres of date palm jungle, the endless sea of sand was still at the end of his gaze. He squinted. Kant naturally knew that these Viegier's marksmen would not lie to him. He waited for a moment. Finally, at the end of his eyesight in the north, a tiny black dot appeared in his eyes. Although he still could not see it clearly, Kant still smiled and praised, "Well done." The vision of the Viegier's marksman was much better than his. Kant left the arrow tower and sped up his patrol of the city wall. In fact, there was no need to patrol. The soldiers were all very conscientious. Rather than saying that this was to patrol the city wall, it was better to say that Kant was venting his energy. After all, since the end of the city defense battle at the beginning of the month, along with the various construction arrangements in the fortress, the Oasis lookout returned to peace. As a lord, he had nothing left to do. All he could do every day was to walk around and look at his newly changed estate. There were only so many places that could change. After 3 weeks, Kant was already a little bored. Although the previous days were a little tense and somewhat depressing, he was still quite fulfilled. Now that he was suddenly relaxed, he was not used to it. After patrolling the city walls, Kant walked down the stairs. 3 Swadian sergeants followed behind him, swaying their burly bodies. These were his guards. "Good morning, Lord Kant." "My lord, how do you do?" "Good morning, my lord." The civilians on the streets greeted Kant warmly. "Good morning," Kant nodded in return. As a noble, it was only right for him to enjoy such respect. After all, he was the lord of the continent of Caradia. If these civilians greeted the lord in an impolite manner, they would be punished according to the lord's temper. Either they would be given a whipping, or they would be captured and thrown into a prison cell to squeeze out a ransom that was enough to bankrupt them. However, Kant scoffed at this. A group of lords who had gone mad because of the war. They walked along the street. A faint sweet smell was spreading. It was the sugar workshop that was brewing date palm honey. Those careful peasant women and the citizens who knew how to measure already boiled sugar on a large scale and cut it into thumb-sized pieces of sugar. The sugar pieces were placed in rattan baskets and placed in the cooler underground storeroom to prevent it from being melted by the high temperature. There were now 20 baskets of date palm sugar in the storeroom of the council hall. They were all boiled during this period of time. They were waiting for Manad's caravan to bring back coarse salt. All of the coarse salt was processed into expensive fine white salt in the salt workshop before being transported to the Stone Pass. Not only was the dukedom of Leo lacking in salt, but it was also lacking in sugar. These coarse date palm honey was also a precious sugar. Moreover, the sweetness was more intense and prominent than pure honey. It would definitely be like the salt, becoming a separate business with the Stone Pass. The amount of trade would also be larger. Of course, if Kant wanted to expand the trade, more than 3,000 sets of mail armor and two-handed battle axes that he had seized could be sold at a sky-high price at the Stone Pass. Even Baron Dillon could not eat all these items alone. He would need the entire northern county of the Dukedom of Leo, or the southern county, which belonged directly to the king, would be able to buy them all. After all, according to the proportion of the Jackalan's body size, a set of mail armor could be cut into 2 sets that were suitable for humans. A two-handed battle axe could be smelted and forged again, and at least 4 longsword could be made. This was a huge strategic resource. Kant would not sell it rashly, which would arouse the suspicion of the Dukedom of Leo. There was no need to cross the Devil's Land to reach the nearby motherland. It would take more than 30 days of trekking through the desert to reach the southern part of the Naran Desert. If those greedy noble wanted to, they could appear outside the walls of Trondheim in a week. Although his elite troops could ensure that he was no longer afraid of the threat of these nobles, they would still disrupt the development of Trondheim. Currently, the buildings that had been upgraded were being built in full swing. The construction workers from Sunno were in charge of the construction. The most time-consuming barracks would be completed on the last day of the month. At that time, it would be the time for Trondheim to be officially upgraded to a castle. Before that, he planned to personally lead a team to the Stone Pass and continue to communicate with his uncle, Baron Dillon. At the same time, he would explore the way and familiarize himself with the terrain in the Seenway range. He planned to build a village in a hidden place. This was his main goal. At the beginning, he had thought that even if there was no village, he would still want to build a logging field in the Seenway range. Especially after defeating the expedition army of the Kingdom of Grey Mane. Kant had completely brought the natural salt mine under his control, and increasing the production of fine white salt had to be put on the agenda. This would also consume a large amount of firewood. The daily cooking of a fire and the brewing of sugar in the sugar workshop all required firewood as fuel. It was obviously not enough to rely solely on the date palm tree that had been cut down previously. The establishment of a new village would alleviate this problem. Although it was unknown which country the village would be randomly located at first, Kant had already planned to establish this village in the Seenway range as the location of the logging and slave-catching fields. To provide a large number of high-quality charcoal for the Oasis lookout. And to provide Kant with a large number of low-level Jack Allen. After all, in this mountain range that separated the Naran Desert from the Dukedom of Leo, who knew how many small groups of low-level Jack Allen tribe were thriving within it? If they were to really talk about it, the number was even more than the Jack Allen tribe in the Naran Desert. After all, although the mountain range was barren, compared to the desert, it was obviously easier to live in it. Back at the council hall, Kant didn't wait for long before Manad and his caravan rushed back. After properly arranging the task of the salt workshop, Manad took off his linen robe and tidied up his appearance. After making sure that he didn't lose his manners, he quickly entered the hall. "Lord Kant, I'm back." Manad first bowed and greeted Kant. "Well done," Kant nodded with a smile and reached out his hand. "Sit down, drink some water and eat something." "Thank you very much." Manad continued to respectfully put his hand on his chest to express his gratitude. The peasant woman who had prepared food beside him brought it over and placed it in front of Manad. Fresh toast, as well as sweet wheat porridge, fresh fried mutton and fried eggs. It was quite a sumptuous meal. Manad was starving and he did not hesitate. He was familiar with Kant's personality. After thanking him, he quickly finished his meal. However, in front of Lord Kent, he still maintained the most basic etiquette. After finishing his meal, he wiped the corner of his mouth and said apologetically to Kent, "I hope I didn't offend you, Lord." Chapter 165, Return of the Natural Salt Mine. Manad came from a noble family of merchants in Nord's mainland. As a member of the wealthy class, he had naturally studied the noble etiquette. After all, his elegant speech and vast knowledge could help these merchants win the trust of unfamiliar nobles and business partners. Thus, Manad paid more attention to etiquette. He could maintain his elegant posture while swallowing down his food. After filling his stomach, he exhaled in satisfaction. However, looking at the lord who was waiting for him to finish his food, he immediately picked up a towel and wiped the corner of his mouth. He said with an apologetic tone, "If I have offended you, please forgive me for my rudeness." "No," Kent replied with a smile. "You did well. Thank you very much." Manad was relieved. The peasant woman next to him walked over and quickly cleaned up the empty wooden bowls and plates on the table. At the same time, she wiped the table clean with a wet towel and a dry towel, making the long table clean again. There was no trace of oil or food residue. Next was the time when Kent and Manad talked. This was business. After chatting for a while, the topic of their conversation also turned to natural salt mines. Manad, who had just returned, reported first, on this trip to the salt mines, 31 humped camels brought back a total of 180 bags of crude salt. After our processing and refining, we will get 120 bags of the purest refined white salt. Well, 120 bags of white salt, Kent nodded and smiled with satisfaction. Not bad. Just simply looked at this world. From the Oasis lookout to the natural salt mine, the round-trip cost was less than 2 great silver coins. Even if the salt was processed and purified, and then transported to the stone pass where Baron Dillon was located, with the cavalry acting as the guards of the trade caravan to escort it, the total costs would not exceed 10 great silver coins. And according to the contract with Baron Dillon, he would receive 50 great silver coins for each bag of white salt. 120 bags of white salt would be 6,000 great silver coins. It was an extremely terrifying number. It was also an extremely terrifying profit. In Kent's hands, the natural coarse salt, which was originally in the alkali soil deep in the desert, was equivalent to a free gift. After a little processing and purification, its value had increased by hundreds or thousands of times. The word terrifying was extremely appropriate. Make preparations today. Kent opened his mouth and pondered for a moment. Then, he instructed Manad, "Tomorrow, we will set off for the stone pass." "Understood," Manad nodded. This was a planned arrangement. He would know when he went to the natural salt mine. The profit from this white salt was extremely huge. To be able to have such a huge profit, it could not be separated from the shiny and cute valuable great silver coin. Otherwise, if these salt was simply saw as condiments and luxury goods, it could only be considered a little thing that could stimulate the tongue that would circulate in the noble's kitchen at most. It was not a valuable precious item that could move anyone's heart. At the very least, from the perspective of Baron Dillon from Stone Pass, he already tasted this profit that he could not refuse. It was obviously impossible for him to directly reject all of Kent's requests. He bought it at the price of 50 great silver coins per bag and sold it for 300 great silver coins. He roughly earned a profit of 250 great silver coins. If he excluded the commerce's own operating costs, the expenses for the many lords, and the payment to some local bandits, the net profit of 150 great silver coins per bag of white salt would reach Baron Dillon in the end. For the northern county of the Dukedom of Leo, which already had a harsh environment, the desertification of Stone Pass was extremely severed. Several arcs of barren field, no matter how hard the serfs and farmers worked for a whole year, they would not be able to earn 50 great silver coins. If this place was really rich and the land was fertile. He would not had the chance to be in charge, he was a noble warrior with a sensitive identity after all. Kant was certain. The cooperation between the two sides would become closer and closer. Before they completely fell out with each other, Baron Dillon would be easy to talk to and protect Kant to the death. He would guard his stone pass, and control the most important and the only passage in the Seenway range. He would completely monopolize the table salt trade with huge profits in his hands. No one would give up such a huge and endless amount of long-term profits. Even if the two sides had a blood feud for generations, they were still able to fake a smile and sat down to negotiate while secretly stabbing each other. Moreover, Kant and Baron Dillon did not have any enmity to begin with. In a short period of time, with the support of such a huge amount of profits, the relationship between the two sides could only get better and better. And it would not get worse and worse. Kant had been a person for 2 lifetimes. In this life, he was still a noble. He had seen many honeymoon periods with entanglement of profits. Or rather, Baron Dillon already treated Kant's Oasis lookout and the natural salt mines as his own family property. As long as his strength grew stronger, he would be able to take over Kant's property after certain accident. It was a popular trick among the noble families, carrying the naked killing intent and greed. Even the fake smile on his face could not cover up the fragile balance line during this honeymoon period. But the honeymoon period had not passed. There was no need to worry about the two sides falling out. After all, if Baron Dillon wanted to develop to the point where he could conquer the Oasis lookout, Kant's troops would have destroyed the dukedom of Leo before that. With the system's blessing, Kant was not afraid of fighting for his future. Miscellaneous matters were finished for today. The salt workshop also lit up firewood and began to boil salt. Using the Sarandian method to purify it, they obtained the most expensive refined white salt. In one night, they could complete it all. For this, Manit also arranged for 20 peasant women and 10 citizens to be in charge. These townsfolks who came from the cities were obviously much smarter than the peasants who came from the countryside as refugees. Moreover, they all knew how to read and write, so they were qualified technical talents. Night fell. Oasis lookout was sprinkled with soft muslin. However, in the crafts area, the sugar workshop and the salt workshop were still busy. The sweet smell of sugar and the sour smell of salt brine mixed together, and the smell was quite strange. Anyone who walked past here were subconsciously cover their mouth and nose. The doors and windows of the houses near the residential area were tightly closed, and the gaps were even clogged with linen. They were afraid that these two different smells would drift into the rooms, disturb their sleep, and affect their work tomorrow. A lot of houses in the residential area had been built now. During these 3 weeks, the Oasis lookout had been greatly built. As a house that could live and attract people, 50 houses were not enough to accommodate thousands of civilians. So while Kant was building barracks, weapons workshops, and cells, he built 150 houses, and completely filled the residential area inside the city wall, forming 5 main streets and more alleys. The 200 houses could accommodate 2,000 people. If all of them were converted into overcrowded bunk beds, even 5,000 people could sleep. Of course, Kant did not have to worry at the moment. Now that there were enough houses, 5 people could be allocated one house, and there were additional public living rooms and toilets for people to use. Even if they got married and had a wife and children, 5 rooms in a house and 15 people living in it would not be a problem. Good planning in advance could often be beneficial for the subsequent development. Council Hall. With Kant as the leader, Phyrantus, Manid, and James were having dinner together. At the same time, they were chatting about some topics, telling jokes to each other, as well as the secret things that they heard. The atmosphere seemed to be harmonious. There was no oppressive atmosphere at all. And the food was also very fragrant, sweet, and delicious, which made people's appetites soar. Until the end of the dinner. He burped lightly. Kant wiped the grease at the corner of his mouth with a napkin in satisfaction and said with a smile, "The chef's skills have been strengthened." This fried lamb chop tastes very good, especially the honey and date palm, as well as the sweet and spicy sauce made with spices. I like it very much. It comes from the skills of the citizens. Manit answered with a smile. Among them, there are tailors, blacksmiths, and chefs. They are much better than ordinary peasants, Firenstis nodded and praised. I have to admit that technical work is more suitable for the citizens to sit up, while peasant work is more suitable for the farmland. James was older and more mature. He did not speak, but he nodded in agreement. Kant also understood this point. Just like the continent of Karadia, the development of handicrafts was often driven by the citizens. As for the peasant, they were mostly in charge of agriculture in the countryside. These literate citizens had their own specialized professions. When they received technical instruction, they could often accept it quickly and complete the task perfectly. Just like now, the sugar and salt workshops were taken over by these immigrant citizens. The peasants were in charge of the agricultural area and the animal husbandry area. Tomorrow, Manit and I will head to the Rock Pass. We will be back at the end of the month. Kant opened his mouth and brought the topic back. Looking at Firentis and James, his commander and doctor said, when the two of us leave, you will be in charge of the Oasis lookout. If there are any problems, it is best to handle them carefully. Understood, the two nodded. The four of them talked about the work arrangements that they were going to do next. That's it, Kant turned his head and saw that the sky had completely darkened, so he walked towards the stairs. He needed a good rest tonight. They would set off at dawn tomorrow morning. After at least 3 days of trekking, they would arrive at the Stone Pass. This journey was not short. The dinner was delicious. Manit also left, but he did not go to sleep. Instead, he inspected the salt workshop and sugar workshop to ensure that there were no problems before returning to his room on the second floor of the council hall to sleep. They weren't going to the pass to travel. They were going to trade. As the fully authorized merchant of Oasis Lookout, Manit naturally couldn't be careless. At the same time, he was already calculating in his heart what he should buy when he arrived at the Stone Pass to meet Baron Dillon and his trade caravan to ensure the replenishment of supplies for Oasis Lookout. Although he was a merchant, he was Kant's subordinate. Everything had to be done for sake of Trondheim. Chapter 166, The Salt Camel Caravan at Dawn. Oh! At dawn. As the first ray of sunlight pierced through the solemn darkness, the sound of sand grouse sounded throughout the oasis. This was the sign of the dawn. The sleepiness of the entire Oasis lookout was cleared. People opened the house and windows, stretched their bodies, greeted each other, and joked about their daily jokes, welcoming a brand new day. The citizen responsible for the clock tower had also woken up. After putting on his clothes and looking at the sun in the sky, he estimated the time in his heart. It was about 5 in the morning. Walking out of his room, he quickly walked toward the clock tower. The citizens and peasant figures had also appeared on the street. They greeted each other with smiles on their faces. Although they had come from different places, since they had come to the Oasis lookout, they were their own people now. They were the residents of the Oasis lookout, the close compatriots of Miracle Land, and the subjects of Lord Kant. The peasant women carried buckets to the spring water. They woke up early to prepare breakfast for the many civilians and soldiers. This was not an easy job. The citizens in charge of the bell tower sighed. After all, it was the food for more than 1,000 people, 3 meals a day, and supper for the night guards. If it weren't for these strong peasant women being busy in the morning and in the dark, then soldiers or civilians would definitely be starving. After breakfast, there would be lunch, and after lunch break, there would be dinner. After dinner, there would be supper prepared. In addition, everyone's wooden bowls, plates, knives, forks, and other cutlery needed to be washed. For this, the 50 peasant women all applied to James, who oversaw the current trivial matters, and mobilized another 50 citizens to help. Otherwise, there would be too much work to be done, and there would be very little time for sleep and rest. When he thought of the fact that his job only required him to ring the bell, the citizen was glad. He arrived at the bell tower. Next to it was the towering council hall made of stone. The citizen subconsciously swallowed his saliva. There were 2 Swadian sergeants standing at the entrance of the council hall. Under the linen robe, there was a bulging double-layer chain armor. Just the heavy heater shield in their hands and the heavy bastard sword at their waists gave him an aura of elite fierceness. This was the strongest elite footman in Swadia. Any man who wanted to make a name for himself was secretly envious of their existence. But he did not forget his work. He entered the top floor of the bell tower. A bronze bell was hanging in the middle of the top floor. Next to it was a wooden ram. As he gently applied force with his hands, he swung the ram according to the rhythm that he had already memorized in his heart and hit the bronze bell with force. Dong 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 dong. The gentle sound of the bell instantly appeared in the middle of the bell tower. As the bell walls vibrated, the bell ring that represented time also entered the ears of everyone in the oasis. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. After the citizen finished ringing the bronze bell, there were chairs beside him. He sat down and looked at the busy figures that appeared on the streets below with a satisfied smile on his face. His next task was to ring the bell every half an hour. He just needed to hit the bell again and again. Although it was boring, it was extremely easy for him as he was in charge of the bell tower in the city before he emigrated. He leaned against the wall in boredom. He raised his head slightly. At the top of the bell tower, on the first day he came to work here, he found a yellow disc embedded at the top. It seemed to be made of gold and was covered with strange and mysterious patterns. The footman who was in charge of telling the time had warned him not to touch this golden disc, because this was the private property of Lord Kent. Of course, he understood. He also did not dare to touch it. The private property of a noble was sacred. If anything happened, he, a small citizen, would probably have to pay with his life. There had always been many citizens who went bankrupt and died because they offended a noble in the continent of Caradia. But today, he could not help but frown. He did not know why, but he found that the golden disc today seemed to be much brighter than when he first came to this bell tower. As the sun rose, the brightness golden disc embedded in the top floor and attic was getting denser and denser, as if it was absorbing the sun's light and secretly storing it. He was a little confused. While he was thinking, there was a lively sound coming from the street outside. Shaking his head, he did not pay too much attention to it. He just took note of it in his heart. On the street under the clock tower, Lord Kent was walking out of the council hall and standing in front of the door, giving some orders. At the same time, someone brought a warhorse and slowly walked towards the south gate under the protection of 40 Sarandian horsemen. 30 single-humped camels full of sacks followed behind under the urging of 10 peasant. At dawn, the temperature was still slightly cold, but it was a good time to set out in the desert. Breakfast had been eaten half an hour ago. Fresh baked bread, antelope meat, and a lump of mutton oil mixed with salt and spices were to ensure physical strength during the next trek. At the same time, it was also to not quickly go hungry because of easily digestible food. After leaving Trondheim, there would not be much enjoyment. Please be careful. Fyrentus and James stood in front of the city gate to send them off. Okay, Kant waved his hand and led his troops and camel caravans towards the depths of the desert to the south. He looked at the horizon in the distance. He did not know if it was an illusion, but the endless hills of the Seenway range seemed to be vaguely visible. But to them, that was indeed their destination, the location of the stone pass. The 40 Sarandian horsemen were scattered in all directions. They held a refined military spear tightly in their hands and looked at their surroundings with a cold expression. Occasionally, there would be skinny low-level Jack Allens appearing. As if they had discovered a new world, they would lightly knock on the horse's belly and rush over. As the mournful howls ended abruptly, their spear was stained with bright red blood and they returned to the formation. These horsemen who wore Sarandian armor were more powerful than the desert bandits. After all, they were heavy cavalries. Moreover, they were the more agile assault cavalries amongst the heavy cavalries. If the low-level Jack Allans encountered these horsemen, they would die. Kant rode his horse forward and looked at these Sarandian horsemen. In his mind, he recalled the first time he went to the Stone Pass. There were only 5 of them, and the rest were desert bandits. Their fighting abilities were significantly different. If they were in danger, it was estimated that these 40 Sarandian horsemen were enough to defeat most of the enemies head-on. This was a display of strength. It was also a guarantee of the safety of the trade caravan. The caravan behind them was made up of 10 peasants and 30 single-humped camels. The camels carried 120 bags of fine white salt as trade goods, equivalent to 4 bags for each camel, plus 4 additional bags of food and water for each camel, as well as food for the warhorse and camels. The name Boat of the Desert did not come for nothing. Just like now, it was like a small boat carrying goods and sailing briskly in the sea of sand. The march was neither fast nor slow. The speed of the journey was very balanced. A mere 3 days of desert trekking was enough for a warhorse, let alone these single-humped camels. From the Oasis lookout to the Stone Pass, it was very easy for these camels. After all, these desert fairies are better at trekking long distances, using their incredible endurance and strength to traverse entire deserts, than transporting goods over short distances. Compared to the single-humped camels that once lived in the Middle East and traveled to Eurasian continent, Kant's harsh journey was a bit of a fuss, killing the chicken with a cow knife. Kant couldn't help it. At the moment, the only trade target he had was the Stone Pass. If he had a trade target in the north of the Naran Desert and the Mannheim coast, needless to say, a caravan of at least 50 single-humped camels would directly cross the desert easily. According to the high-level Jack Allen captives, the Mannheim coast, which was close to the Sea of Stars, was also one of the prosperous areas in maritime trade. Every day, hundreds of merchant ships docked at the port of the Kingdom of Grey Mane, unloading a large number of materials from overseas into warehouses. At the same time, various specialties of the Mannheim coast were loaded onto the merchant ships, forming a complete trade chain. Just thinking about it made people excited. Take the Dukedom of Leo, which Kant was most familiar with, as an example. The 200 meters wide Resnistikan River originated from the Great Swamp of the East and it nourished the soil on both sides of the river. In the busiest month, only dozens of merchant ships traveled every day. As for the port of Lionheart City, which focused on river trade, there were no more than 30 merchant ships docked every day. This was also due to the fact that the South County, which was directly under the Dukedom of Leo, was a grain-producing area. If this Renistan River, which had been used for grain transportation, appeared in the desolate North County, it was estimated that there would be no more than 5 merchant ships every day. Most of them would be transporting materials to the North County, where the products were scarce. Instead of engaging in mutually beneficial trade, a large amount of important grain would be transported along the river to the borders of other dukedom or kingdoms to earn great silver coins. I really want to see the scenery of the Mannheim coast. Kant's face was filled with anticipation. A region that mainly engaged in maritime trade that was dominated by humans. It was really quite attractive to him. However, this was only an idea, a simple idea. After all, the current Trondheim had just finished off the expedition army of the Kingdom of Grey Mane and was basically in a hostile status with the Mannheim coast. If they really went to the north of the Naran Desert rashly, the end result would probably not be to harvest trading partners, but to be hunted down by the sensitive Jack Allen troops. For safety, Kant would not go to the Mannheim coast for the time being. After he completely built the Oasis lookout like an iron wall, so that even the Dukedom of Leo had to acknowledge his existence, Kant would choose to send a few elites to the Mannheim coast to scout the situation. What he needed now was to become stronger as soon as possible. After absorbing the dividends of this battle, first, he upgraded Trondheim into a castle. At the same time, he set up a new council hall in the hidden area of the Seenway range. This would allow his force to spread and grow at the same time. Chapter 167, The Demands of the Posthouse Militiamen. Can't let a group through the Naran Desert. However, the journey this time was much easier than before. It was all thanks to the camel caravan formed by 30 single-humped camels. Without having to personally carry a large amount of supplies and water, the war horses felt relaxed and able to walk quickly on the top of the dune. In addition, there was sufficient water and fodder, as well as a linen robe that could shade the sun. After a day's journey, these war horses were all quite energetic. Very soon, they climbed over layers of dune and saw the post house that used to be in the sand plains. The sky had already darkened. The bright starlight and moonlight could not block the light that rose from the post house. From the oasis lookout to the stone pass, only the post house here could provide accommodation and replenish the important drinking water. It could be considered an important part of Kant's original plan, and now it had also played a great role. They immediately led the camel caravan and cavalry over. The 10 Swadian militiamen who were in charge of guarding the place had already noticed the cavalries coming from the north. Although the night was dark, it did not blind people's eyes. Following the urgent shouts, these militiamen all carried heavy spears in front, wore iron scale armor, and carried large wooden shields. They lined up neatly in front of the post house, but they were not ready for battle. They were welcoming Kant's arrival. The camel caravan and cavalries climbed down the dune. They were not slow either. Kant rode his horse and walked in front. These militiamen had sharp eyes. After all, as half a long-range shooter, they needed to have eagle eyes. After seeing Kant, they hurriedly took a few steps forward and bowed respectfully. "Seeing you is like seeing the greatest sun in the world. My lord, we sincerely welcome your arrival." Kant nodded with a smile. "No need to be so polite." At the same time, he got off his horse and looked at the 10 militiamen. He shook his head slightly and asked Manad beside him, "When did these 10 simple militiamen become so fond of flattering me?" "I think they are right," Manad answered with a smile. "Is that so?" Kant smiled and shook his head. Everyone loved to hear flattery, but he was not interested in it. After all, he had lived 2 lives. He had the ability to resist puffery and flattery. They could not treat him like an ordinary 16-years-old noble young master. Of course, he was willing to listen to flattery occasionally to make his mood a little happier. Seeing Kant chuckle, Manad shrugged. "It's all because they're stationed here. They don't like it," Kant nodded in understanding. "They don't like it very much," Manad smiled helplessly. "The last time I came, they applied to me, hoping that there would be other militias to replace them. It would be best if they took turns to be on duty instead of having 10 of them here all the time. It seems that we don't have enough troops, right?" Kant raised his eyebrows. "That's right, I have also explained it," Manad said. After a pause, he shook his head helplessly and smiled bitterly. "These militias are probably going crazy from holding back here. It sounds really sad." Kant shook his head and smiled. Looking at these militias with anticipation, he said helplessly, "You guys continue to persevere. When I return to the Oasis lookout, I will arrange for people to take turns with you." "Hooray!" the militias immediately cheered. Kant understood this. Facing the vast sea of sand, there were only 10 of them in the entire post house. There was no entertainment on weekdays, and there was also no rich food to ease the growing agitation. Other than waiting for a trade caravan to pass by, hoping to learn some new things, they also hoped to be transferred out of this post house. But for Kant, the 10 militiamen really did not have a good area to move to. At present, the Oasis lookout was not too dangerous. There was also not much area to look after. Even if there were a few accidents caused by low-level jack-allans, the newly recruited 120 desert bandits could deal with it in 3 weeks. Their performance was much better than these militias. This is also a troublesome matter. Kant shook his head. But after thinking about it, it wasn't difficult to solve it. Next was the strategic decision to develop the Sinway range. Let the troops bring these 10 militiamen into the depths of the mountain range to experience a few battles and upgrade to a higher level troop class. This way, it would be convenient for them to be integrated into other troops. With an idea, Kant felt much more at ease. They entered the posthouse. After the cavalries and the accompanying peasants settled the war horses and camels, they all walked in. Not long after, the militiamen brought out hot food. The porridge was boiled to a pulp, the baked crispy bread and the chopped cabbage was fried with minced antelope meat. There was also a boiled egg for each person. It was quite a sumptuous supper. It had just been made. It was easy to digest, and it could ease the fatigue of Kant and the others. For Kant's comfort, the militiamen even brought a bucket of bath water from the well. After heating it, they placed it in the room prepared for Kant so that he could take a bath before he went to sleep. Kant did not refuse. As a feudal lord, he could not serve the people all the time especially with his privilege. He quickly finished his supper. Kant returned to his room alone. Manad was naturally in charge of taking care of the other cavalries and peasants. The wooden bathtub was huge. Kant took a nice hot bath and washed off his fatigue before coming out. He wiped his body clean and then lay down on the soft bed to sleep. With the wool blanket covering his body, the cold of the night could not invade. The cavalries and the accompanying peasants also slept in their respective rooms. After the tiring journey in the desert, it was already a happy thing to be able to rest in bed. No one was picky. And no one complained. When all 10 militiamen were mobilized, they stood at the top of the post house and at the door, keeping watch for Kant and the others. All of them were in high spirits. Although they knew that there would not be any accidents around them, even there were only a few low-level Jack Allens, but for the sake of safety, they still maintained their utmost vigilance. Nothing happened that night. The next day, at dawn, Kant, who had already formed his biological clock, woke up automatically. There were some noises outside the room. It was the sound of the cavalries who had woken up talking to the peasants accompanying them. There was also Manad arranging fresh water supplies and leaving some food supplies for the post house. When Kant came out, breakfast was served. It was not porridge that was easy to digest. Instead, it was sliced bread and barbecued meat. As long as he ate this greasy breakfast, he would be able to stay up until noon. The militiamen were very considerate. They even helped to feed the 40 war horses and 30 single-humped camels outside. Everything was prepared very well. You all did well. Kant finished his breakfast and nodded in praise to the busy militiamen. This made the militiamen look even happier. Of course, Kant also understood what they were thinking and pondered for a moment. He said to them, "I will set up a new village in the Sinway range. At that time, there will be a lack of defensive forces there. I think if you don't mind, maybe you can go there and try. Although there are dangers, there are also opportunities." "We are willing to go," the militiamen nodded one after another. They did not care about the dangers. Because danger often came with opportunities. Just as Kant said, if they went to the new village in the Sinway range, they might be lucky enough to gain a lot of experience points and upgrade to a higher level troop class. This was also their lifelong wish. Doing nothing was not the pursuit of the Swadian people. After giving a few more instructions, Kant led the group and set off again. Manad followed behind the caravan, while the 40 Sarandian horsemen rode around on their Sarandian horses to defend the surroundings. In the next day or so, they would be on their real trekking. There would not be any post house anymore to provide them with accommodation and supplies. This post house represented half of the journey. As long as they could hold on for another day, they would be able to reach the stone pass. They had already been through this many times and had gained experience. Time slowly passed, and the sun was setting in the west. At dusk, the entire outline of the Sinway range was finally revealed on the horizon. Its towering mountains were layered on top of each other. It was unknown how many mountains and valleys were hidden within it. It carried a great power that could stop the erosion of the desert, protecting the dukedom of Leo. The Sinway range was also known as the shield of the dukedom of Leo. It was precisely for this reason, Kant led the team to speed up their journey. Soon, they found a canyon that was as sharp as a knife. The cliffs on both sides were quite smooth. In the deepest part of the canyon near the North County, there was the stone pass, firmly blocking the connection between the Naran Desert and the dukedom of Leo. It was the most important fortress. The canyon seemed to have been cleaned up. The messy trees and piles of soil had disappeared. What appeared in front of them was a dirt road that was barely enough to travel with the carriage. It was obvious that this was Baron Dillon had built the dirt road to ensure that Kant's trade caravan could pass through the canyon and enter the stone pass quickly. It was all done by the militias, and it did not cost much. Very considerate. Kant urged his horse forward, a slight smile on his face. Perhaps, Manad shrugged. Both of them understood that this road could be the aid of the trade caravan, and it was also the passage for the troops. Since this road had been built, they might have to send people, either openly or secretly, to follow Kant and the others back to the Oasis lookout. They would also explore the possible natural salt mines and record them on the map for future use. Based on Kant's understanding of Baron Dillon, of course he knew that this was the real purpose. He would never underestimate the greed of the noble. Soon, they arrived at the north gate of the stone pass. Kant looked up and saw that there were more than 20 conscripted militias standing on top of it. Compared to when they first arrived, the security work was much better. However, when they saw such a large number of troops arriving, they were still a little flustered. But they were quickly stabilized. A middle-aged man wearing mail armor and dressed as a knight appeared on the city wall. When he saw Kant and Manad, his face was still expressionless. Only when he swept his gaze across the 40 Sarandian horsemen did he finally narrow his eyes, carrying a kind of suppressed shock. He could see that under the linen robe of the cavalries, there were pure iron armors and the boots in the stirrups were chainmail boots. Chapter 168, The Shock of the Vassal Knights. This was exactly what he was shocked about, because even he did not own such boots. Even when he was on the battlefield, he only wore leather boots inlaid with iron. Now, 40 cavalries had come, and all of them were wearing iron armors. And the war horses under them were all fat and strong. They were completely different from the malnourished thin horses in the stone pass. Perhaps the war horse that Baron Dillon raised himself could be compared to the war horses that they rode on. This is really Kant. He gulped. He thought of the last 2 times when the Oasis lookout sent people to here, there were not these many heavy cavalries. Moreover, all of them were elites, who were comparable to the vassal cavalry that served under Baron Dillon in the Stone Pass. As a vassal knight, he was also a little unwilling. But he had to admit it. In fact, whether it was their weapons and equipment, or the war horse they rode, these 40 heavy cavalries were much better than them. Their differences were like between a real noble and a wanderer. Unfamiliar troops, please stop. He gulped. Although he knew that it was Kant and Manad, he still did not give the order to open the city gates. Instead, he shouted, "This is the territory of Dukedom of Leo, the Stone Pass in the North County, Baron Dillon's estate. If you want to enter, please state your intentions and show sufficient goodwill." Kant led 40 heavy cavalry soldiers. One could tell that they were valiant and elite troops by looking at them. He did not dare to casually put them into the Stone Pass. If not for these city walls, even with those peasant recruits and armed militias, over 1,000 people would not be able to stop these 40 heavy cavalry soldiers. They would be massacred one-sided, even if the vassal knight himself would not make any difference if he joined the battle. This was an absolute advantage in quality. Hearing the vassal knight's question on the city wall, Manad looked at Kant. This was diplomatic language. At the same time, it was a way to show each other their identities. Kant nodded at him. "You go." "Understood," Manad replied. After getting Kant's permission, he urged his horse forward. Looking at the vassal knight on the city wall, he shouted calmly, "This is the second son of the Archduke of Leo, Cameron, the Baron of the Dukedom of Leo, the Lord of the Naran Desert, Lord Cant." The vassal knight on the city wall had long seen that Cant was at the bottom. His face was covered in cold sweat. As he sent someone to inform Baron Dillon, he gritted his teeth, he struggled to open his mouth and said, "Your lordship, Baron Cant, may I ask why you led your troops to the Stone Pass? Forgive my rudeness. To allow your 40 heavy cavalries entering Baron Dillon's estate, we have to be reported and approved by the Baron." Cant said to Manad, "Tell him that I understand." Lord Cant expresses his understanding. Manad nodded, he immediately replied, "Our purpose here is to carry out trade. I hope that you can inform Baron Dillon that we are leading these 40 heavy cavalries only to deal with the large number of Jack Allans in the Naran Desert to prevent the goods from being plundered. I hope that both sides can understand each other." After exchanging a few more words, the person who informed them finally returned. At the same time, Baron Dillon and his vassal knights were also here. They were all wearing mail armors and were all in high spirits. Their faces were glowing. Compared to when Cant first saw them, not only were their equipment upgraded, but their physiques were also stronger. It was obvious that they had been living well recently. Baron Dillon came to the city wall. The vassal knight wiped the cold sweat off his face and reported everything in a low voice. "You did well. When you go back, ask my butler to give you 20 great silver coins." Baron Dillon nodded. Although his face was expressionless, it made the vassal knight feel at ease. "If there is such a situation in the future, you should still do this. You represent the Stone Pass. This is very good. Thank you for your compliment." The vassal knight was delighted. He bowed his head to express his gratitude and then left. Baron Dillon did not care about him anymore. Instead, he lowered his head to look at the 40 heavy cavalry soldiers who were in formation 100 meters away from the city wall. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. He also looked at the full set of chain armors, the Sarandian helmets in their arms, and the strong physique and the majestic war horses. There was a hint of desire in the depths of his eyes. These were the heavy cavalry soldiers that even he did not have. However, he quickly regained his calm. His emotions were very stable. "Open the city gates." Baron Dillon waved his hand and looked at Cant below. He then swept his gaze past the peasant recruits behind him. There was some indignation on his face, there was also a slice of reprimand in his tone. "That is Baron Cant. Have you all forgotten? This is the friend of Outstone Pass. How dare you not open the city gates? Open them now and let our friend in." Understood, the peasant recruits did not dare to refute. They had no way to refute. As they opened the wooden bolt that held up the city gate, the iron chain pulled open the city gate. The 2 heavy wooden gates were slowly opened. Baron Dillon also walked down the city gate. He brought the vassal knights behind him to come down and personally greet Cant and the others. His tone was very happy. "Dear little Cant, I feel that we haven't met for a long time. I'm so happy to see you again." "I'm happy to see you too, Uncle Dillon." Cant had a sincere smile on his face, as if he was not angry about what had happened before. The two of them chatted as they walked arm in arm into the Stone Pass. Their relationship was very close. Behind them, Manad led the camel caravan to enter first. The bulging sack on the camel's back made the smile on Baron Dillon's face deepen. However, when he carefully swept his gaze across the 40 heavy cavalry soldiers, a hint of fear appeared in the depths of his eyes. The stone floor of the Stone Pass had already been swept clean. At the very least, the dirty dirt was gone. The refugees with colorful faces were still waiting in the straw shacks on both sides. When they saw Cant and Baron Dillon riding on their horses, they looked at them expressionlessly. They only bent their backs and placed their hands on their chests casually. There was not much so-called sincerity in them. It was as if they were just dealing with them. Baron Dillon also pretended not to see them. These lowly peasants were simply dispensable to him. When he returned to the official residence built close to the mountain range, the soldiers guarding the door walked over and took Baron Dylan's warhorse. There were also servants who came over and helped to take Kant's warhorse. "There's no need." Kant declined politely. He turned his head and said to the Sarandian horsemen behind him, "You guys take the horses to the stable. There's no need for so many people to follow me. At the Stone Pass, Uncle Dylan's estate is very safe." "Haha, of course, little Kant. You can treat it as your estate here." Baron Dylan laughed loudly. The Sarandian horsemen automatically divided into two groups. 30 people led their war horses and followed the servants to the stable at the back. The remaining 10 people stood behind Kant. It was obvious that they wanted to follow him as a guard. Baron Dylan did not mind. He waved his hand and said, "Come in, all of you. It seems that you are good lads." Of course, Kant nodded with a smile. However, he still arranged for Manad, "You go and deliver the goods to Uncle Dylan's trade caravan leader." As he said that, a slightly apologetic smile appeared on his face. "This time, I brought a lot of goods. It might be a little troublesome." "Ha ha ha, I am not afraid of trouble," Baron Dylan laughed loudly. The more goods he brought, the more he earned. The profits from the last batch of refined white salt made him so excited that he did not sleep for a whole night. "I asked someone to arrange dinner," Baron Dylan said as he held Kant's arm like an elder. The smile on his face became brighter. "If you had come earlier, I would have been able to hold a banquet to welcome you. But tomorrow, I will also invite the famous gentleman from Stone Pass to hold a grand banquet." "Thank you so much." Kant pulled his hand out without leaving a trace, a smile on his face. They walked into the slightly depressing official residence. This building was actually built with the specifications of a small fortress. Although it was not as tall as a castle, with the complete defensive facilities and the narrow gateway, a few hundred elite soldiers would be enough to guard this official residence and ensure that the Stone Pass would last until the last moment. They entered the Lord's Hall. Torches were lit one after another and inserted into the blackened stone wall. On both sides of the long table in the hall, the Lord's main seat and the guests' table each had a silver three-pronged candlestick. The 3 candles on the candlestick were lit, emitting a steady and bright light. "Don't you miss it?" Baron Dylan smiled and invited Kant and the 10 Sarandian horsemen to take their seats. At the same time, he brought his vassal knights to take their seats as well. With a smile on his face, he said to Kant, "These are silver candlesticks bought in South County, and these honey candles are all rare luxuries in our North County. However, you are the son of Archduke Cameron, so you should have seen a lot of these things." "Very good," Kant nodded with a smile. He sniffed slightly, but his brows were slightly furrowed. "What's wrong?" Baron Dylan noticed his furrowed brows. The smile on his face was slightly restrained. He frowned and asked, "Little Kant, did you discover something?" "Honey candles?" Kant asked. Baron Dylan's expression was a little awkward. He turned his head and glanced at the chubby butler next to him, who had a blank look on his face. He had an answer in his heart. Baron Dylan's face was pale, however, he still nodded and said, "That's right. When I was buying it, the merchant from South County told me that this is the purest honey candle. It's also the favorite candle used by the noble families of South County at the banquet." "Well, Uncle Dylan, perhaps you have bought a not-so-pure honey candle," Kant shrugged slightly. Baron Dylan was puzzled. "Is it a fake?" "No, it is indeed a honey candle," Kant shook his head. He frowned and said, "But the texture is not pure. It should be the wax liquid that melted after the original honey candle was burned. After it was collected, it was heated and melted, then reprocessed into a honey candle. From the light and the pungent smell produced by this candle, it can be known that this is a fake made by those merchants. These dirty bastards from South County actually dared to lie to me." Baron Dylan seemed to be very angry. Kant's expression was regretful and shame. "This is a small trick of those merchants from South County. It can be considered a scam. I didn't expect that, Uncle Dylan, you also encountered it. Chapter 169, The Celebratory Tournament. These cunning merchants from South County. Baron Dylan's face was gloomy. If I meet them again, I swear I will hang them. As a baron with real power, he was certainly qualified to say that. He was even more qualified to do so. In the laws of the Dukedom of Leo, it was clearly stated that if a merchant dared to deceive and scam a noble, they could directly hang the merchant on the gallows after they were caught. If the fraud was indeed true, there was no need for a trial at all. With Baron Dylan's anger, the atmosphere in the Lord's Hall turned cold. No one would be happy if they bought a fake. It was a second-hand junk that had been used by others. On the chairs on both sides of the long table, the vassal knights who belonged to the Stone Pass and listened to Baron Dylan's orders looked equally terrible. Some of them even had a blush of humiliation on their faces. They had never seen the market before, and they had praised the craftsmanship of this kind of wax candle, showing how knowledgeable they used to be. But now that Kant, who came from the top noble class, had exposed this matter, their cheeks were burning with shame. This was no different from the country bumpkins they looked down on the most. As knights, the noble reserve forces, they thought that they were more superior than those fat and greedy merchants who only knew about silver coins. Therefore, they were extremely embarrassed and angry, wishing that they could kill those treacherous southern county merchants. Uncle Dylan, these are candles. Kant seemed to have sensed the cold atmosphere in the hall. He shook his head slightly, with a sincere smile on his face, and said to Baron Dylan, I don't think you need to care. Those treacherous South County merchants will never come again, but to them, they have lost the wealthy noble who can buy real honey candles. However, Baron Dylan was still a little angry. I don't want to give my silver coins to these bastards who deserve to be hanged. Don't be angry. Kant shrugged and only advised him a little. This baron from the Stone Pass was indeed qualified to do so. But in reality, he could not do it. Because there were power of the noble behind these merchants of Dukedom of Leo. Just like how Baron Dylan had a trade caravan from his wife's family as a tool to amass wealth, the nobles of the South County had long formed an unspoken rule. Basically, they were the backers of the merchants of the South County, otherwise, how would these merchants dare to deceive the noble? Moreover, they scammed the Baron Dylan who held power. If they were not absurdly bold, then they had a very strong backer. Baron Dylan grumbled for a long time, and Kant listened for the same amount of time. It seemed that he realized that something was wrong with him. Baron Dylan suddenly understood. We haven't started dinner yet, right? It's all my fault. I almost forgot about this matter. Those merchants from South County are just too despicable, he said and clapped his hands hurriedly. Serve the dishes. The servants who had already prepared by the wall immediately served the dishes for dinner. Roasted fat quail, roasted antelope tail, sliced white bread covered with cheese, with a glass of ale, and for dessert, apples boiled in ale and covered with honey sauce, and a thick milk soup with various seasonings. It was a marvelous dinner. The servants left quickly after serving the food and were waiting not far away. The aroma of the food filled the hall. Kant also praised, "Thank you for your hospitality. This is really a sumptuous dinner. It was hastily prepared. I hope it suits your appetite." Baron Dylan smiled and extended his hand. He said to Kant, "Thanks to you, the standard of our food can be improved. Otherwise, with those profiteers from South County, every time they come to trade, they would plunder all the great silver coins that we worked so hard to earn. You used to be the youngest son of Archduke Cameron in South County. You definitely know that those merchants are really too greedy." "Yes, they are very greedy." Kant lowered his head unnaturally. His face seemed to be a little depressed, but there was a hint of hatred in his voice. "To be honest, I don't like them very much." His words seemed to imply something. Baron Dylan's expression was slightly stunned. He immediately understood and quickly explained, "Oh, little Kant, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that." He was apologizing for his own gaffe. No, it's okay, Uncle Dylan. This is the truth after all. I also don't like those guys, Kant shrugged and smiled. He said to Baron Dylan, but no matter what, I'm really touched that you can take care of me. It's what I should do, Baron Dylan nodded and smiled. The welcoming dinner officially began. Both sides were having normal conversation, but the atmosphere became cheerful. However, most of the conversations were between Baron Dylan and Kant. There were more than 20 vassal knights on both sides of the long table, as well as the accompanying 10 Sarandian horsemen were all eating their own food in silence. They listened to the conversation between the two people and acted as the background. The night gradually darkened. In the Lord's Hall, the candles on the candlesticks had all been replaced. As the plates were filled with residues, the dinner was about to end. It was a pleasure chatting with you. Baron Dylan laughed loudly, his mood seemed to be very good. The same goes for me, Kant lowered his head and smiled. The conversation between the two ended with mutual flattery. After all, Kant was also a transporter who had come from the modern era. A few times of untraceable flattery and feigned curiosity made Baron Dylan talk even more lively on the topics. The conversation was quite delightful and lively. Timely flattery and inquiry could make the atmosphere more lively. Of course, the dinner was about to end. Baron Dylan glanced at the 10 Sarandian horsemen who were sitting on both sides of Kant. With a smile in his eyes, he asked, "Little Kant, are these 10 brave men were the vassal knights who follow and protect you?" "Oh, they are the people who protect me," Kant also answered with a smile, "but they are not knights." "Oh? I am very curious about that." Baron Dylan continued to smile and asked Kant, "They are very strong and have completely reached the level of knights. Could it be that such outstanding talents have not been conferred the title and become knights who own villages and fief?" "There are no villages or any land in the Naran desert that can be conferred," Kant shrugged, appearing to be very regretful and sad. "Uncle Dylan, you said that North County is a barren place. Then you definitely have not been to the Naran desert. That is the real barren place." "Naran desert? No, I've been there." Baron Dylan's face had a hint of nostalgia. 10 years ago, your father, Archduke Cameron, took us to exterminate those Jack Allen tribes, which was to go to the Oasis lookout. As he said that, his face also had a hint of solemnity. The battlefield lasted for 2 weeks, and we came back. The environment there was really too harsh. Maintaining the supply line of 2,000 cavalries was almost as large as the scale of the war with the Silver Platter Kingdom. Kant nodded, his tone still dejected. "That's right. It was simply hell there." "I understand." Baron Dylan opened his mouth to persuade him to stay. "Little Kant, you can stay at the Stone Pass. No one will say anything. In a place like the Naran Desert, other than wild beasts like the Jack Allens, no one is willing to live there." Kant shook his head. "There are still my people there." However, there was a hint of interest on his face. He looked at Baron Dylan and sighed softly. "I also have my own guards. Although there are not many of them, it is absolutely no problem for me to resist the attack of those small groups of Jack Allen." His tone paused slightly, he also said dispiritedly, "Moreover, I have promised Father that I will become the Lord of the Naran Desert. I will not hide in the Stone Pass like a turtle swimming in the Renenston River. I will hide my head whenever I encounter any difficulties." "What a great ambition!" Baron Dylan seemed to be very happy, he nodded and said to the vassal knights on both sides of the long table, "He reminds me of Princess Sophia. Did you know that when I followed the princess, her personality was very tenacious?" The vassal knights nodded awkwardly. Especially the vassal knights who had ran away in the past 2 years, they lowered their heads and did not say a word. Princess Sophia was a taboo topic in the dukedom of Leo, the remote Stone Pass was the same. This Baron Dylan, who had once followed Princess Sophia, could speak without any restraints. They were only lowly knights, how would they dare to speak recklessly? Kant looked at Baron Dylan sincerely, as if he had found a bosom friend. He said in a moved tone, "Thank you for your understanding, Uncle Dylan. This makes my heart full of motivation. If you encounter any difficulties, come and find me." Baron Dylan patted his chest, his tone was not shy. "When I followed Princess Sophia, I was still a cavalry of the guards. Before you were born, I was already fighting for your mother's loyalty by pulling out my longsword." "Thank you very much." Kant's face was full of gratitude. Baron Dylan nodded with a smile, as if he was a true elder. The two of them chatted about some heartwarming topics. Using the harmonious atmosphere, Baron Dylan said to Kant, "Little Kant, after the banquet at noon tomorrow, I will arrange a small-scale tournament in the afternoon. After all, we do not have many entertainment activities in North County. This kind of tournament will be held when you come here, as Uncle's welcoming ceremony." As soon as he finished speaking, the vassal knights beside him immediately had a look of joy on their faces. Many people were whispering to each other. The tournament was also an activity that the Dukedom of Leo was passionate about. Being able to obtain the first place in the tournament would also be helpful to one's reputation. If a noble wanted to be conferred a knight fief, they would also consider this tournament. After all, to be the champion of the tournament, one must be powerful. As long as one showed proper loyalty, it was easy to gain the favor of the noble. In the poor North County, the last tournament was held 2 years ago by the Viscount of the North County, Wayne, in his Logue Castle. At that time, the grand event attracted the attention of the entire North County. It was said that the first-ranked knight already had 3 villages as fief. These vassal knights could not help but become restless. Kant naturally understood the significance of the tournament, and his face was filled with emotion. He said to Baron Dylan, "Uncle Dylan, isn't this too wasteful? The cost of the tournament is not small. Even if it was a small-scale tournament, without 500 great silver coins, it would probably not be able to be held." "Small scale," Baron Dylan nodded with a smile, as if he was very grateful to Kant. "It's your guards and my vassal knights. The tournament only limited to our stone pass. We won't invite the lord of other places." "Then I'm really grateful." Kant was even more moved. Chapter 170, The Raging Dark Tide. The matter of the tournament was thus decided. As the banquet ended, the excited vassal knights brought them out of the official residence. In an extremely short period of time, the news spread throughout the Stone Pass, making those gentries, celebrities, and landlords hear about this news. The tournament was not a small matter. Even if it was a small-scale tournament, which was limited to the Stone Pass, it still made many people crazy about it. The vassal knights were all rubbing their fists, intending to show off their skills. Even those landlords and merchants with small assets had to prepare their family's most outstanding children to go on stage. After all, this was a performance stage. If Baron Dylan recognized their abilities, it would be possible for them to become knights. Even the southern village of the Stone Pass had spread the news in the shortest amount of time. However, the main character of tomorrow's tournament, Kant had already returned to his room, sat on the chair, but his expression was very calm. It was the same room he had stayed in the last time he came. The tables, chairs, and armoires were all new, but the biggest difference was that the bed was covered with a soft velvet quilt and with a thick wool blanket. The overall layout was much more shabby than his first visit. Baron Dylan had really earned a lot of great silver coins in this short period of time. The profits of the table salt trade could be said to be terrifying. Kant naturally understood. Even the vassal knights who were once wearing the coarse linen robe had changed into brand new soft clothes and thicker mail armors. From this, it could be seen that the table salt brought by Manad last time had greatly increased Uncle Dylan's appetite. Otherwise, the atmosphere would not be so harmonious this time. And he had even held a tournament for Kant alone. One had to know that back then, when Kant was escorted through the Stone Pass from the castle of Leo, this Uncle Dylan did not show up. He did not even greet Kant as he should have. It was like he did not know who Kant was, nor did he know about this matter. This was the way of the world. Kant curled his lips slightly. They could not be separated from the profits involved. The so-called family and friendship were often weak in the front of profit. Moreover, this was a world where power was paramount. The so-called moral were just ridiculous principles to bound ordinary people. For the sake of the title of nobility, even brothers in blood could turn against each other, and they could even poison their biological father. It was all because of the profits involved. At the banquet, Baron Dillon's various attempts to probe him were all temporarily suppressed due to the interests involved. Hee, Kant could not help but laugh mockingly. Thinking of that scene, Baron Dillon sowed discord between himself and the South County, revealed the fact that Princess Sophia was Kant's biological mother. All of it was to let him, who was once his mother's follower, became Kant's reliance. Obviously, it was for the natural salt mine that Kant controlled. No problem, Kant would also cooperate. With such a shield in front of him, attracting forces for him, why not use it? Face? Dignity? The dignity of a noble? Kant disdained it. If even his own development was so weak, what was the point of caring about these things? He was afraid that those greedy nobles would have eaten him until there was not even a residue left. Where would he prove his dignity? These were words that only the strong were qualified to say. Dang dang dang! There was a knock on the door. At the same time, Manet's voice was heard, "Lord Kant, can I come in?" "Come in," Kant replied. The door was pushed open. Manet walked in and carefully closed the door behind him. He whispered to Kant, "Lord, it's all done. There are a lot of silver coins and they have been placed on the camels. 10 Sarandian horsemen have been specially arranged to look after them." "Well done," Kant nodded. "I plan to buy some iron tools to bring back tomorrow," Manet said. "We are very short of these materials now, but there is a limit to the amount sold to us at the Stone Pass. It seems that they are afraid that we will melt the farm tools and turn them into weapons. We need you to negotiate with the Stone Pass." "I'll take care of it," Kant nodded and exhorted, "buy more axes." "Yes," Manet agreed. The two talked about some common topics, but they didn't have a deep conversation. Manet took his leave and returned to his room. He couldn't talk too much in other people's territory, even though their rooms were all connected. But who knew if the soundproofing was good? Kant was very vigilant about revealing secrets during such conversations. In the films and television shows of his previous life, things like cubicles, secret rooms, and secret eavesdropping passages were quite common. Walls had ears. Kant naturally prioritized caution and could not reveal his power too early. He needed to maintain a fragile balance. Kant's vigilance was reasonable. After the two of them finished their conversation, until everyone fell asleep, a thin and small figure slowly squirmed in the narrow secret tunnel under the lower floor. Without making any noise, he quietly returned to a room at the corner of the official residence. Soon, he left and came to another room in the mansion. Baron Dillon was sitting there with 2 vassal knights, waiting for him expressionlessly. The thin and small figure bent down and reported everything he had heard at the same time. Then, he quietly stood in the middle of the room with his head lowered, not daring to say anything. "Well done. Go down." Baron Dillon waved his hand, indicating that he could leave. The skinny figure bowed and immediately turned to leave. It was very straightforward. The door was closed. There was no sound of footsteps outside the door. Baron Dillon nodded in satisfaction and said, "These rats are still useful." Of course, the 2 most trusted vassal knights nodded. The rats were a spy organization at the Stone Pass. They had just developed in recent years. Initially, they were members of the trade caravan of Baron Dillon's wife's family. However, as their financial resources had increased recently, they had also recruited many capable people to help them. It could be said that these rats had given them a lot of useful information, which was very effective. And today, Baron Dillon was very satisfied with Kant's secret surveillance. "This little Kant is really young," he chuckled as if victory was in his hands. After we obtain more power, we will be able to control him. You are wise, the two vassal knights flattered him. Haha, Baron Dylan smiled. However, there was a hint of hatred in the depths of his eyes. His father assigned me here, but he did not expect that I would actually obtain the help of his son. I really want to see if he will regret it in the future. Thinking back to the humiliation he had suffered in the past, and the humiliation of not being able to integrate into the noble circle of North County, he was filled with resentment. The vassal knight complimented, "Lord Dylan, now that you have the salt mine and the table salt trade, you will be able to develop quickly. You will definitely have the power to improve further." "That's right," the other vassal knight nodded. If he had the table salt trade, he would have in control of great silver coins as well. There would be an endless income of great silver coins. Baron Dylan smiled again. However, he still rubbed his eyebrows. He instructed the two of them, "Be careful recently. Our table salt trade has attracted the attention of many noble families. As far as I know, Viscount Wayne of Logue Castle is very curious about why we have so much fine table salt. I think he has already sent a secret agent here. We will remain vigilant." The two vassal knights nodded. "Very good," Baron Dylan nodded in relief. He was very reassured by the two knights who had followed him from the very beginning. At this moment, he said to them, "Don't look at the fief village. If I can obtain a better estate, or even contact the hidden forces of Princess Sophia, I can even overthrow the Dukedom of Leo. When the time comes, the richer South County will be our choice, not these barren North County territories. We are absolutely loyal to you." The two vassal knights immediately expressed their loyalty. "That's right." Baron Dylan pondered for a while, but he still said to them, "Perform well tomorrow and test out the cavalries that Kant brought. These guys are definitely not ordinary people. I reckon that they were once elite knights." "What do you mean?" the vassal knight asked. "It would be best if they could join us. If they don't join us, we can still show our goodwill now." Baron Dylan lowered his head slightly. He said, "It might be the power of the Silver Platter Kingdom. After all, when Princess Sophia was still alive, she personally helped Cameron to become the Archduke. However, before the Silver Platter Kingdom could intervene, this princess died suddenly. Some hidden spies have yet to be activated." The vassal knight nodded. "Understood." Baron Dylan was reassured by them, but he still exhorted them, "Don't show any hostility at the moment. When we are strong enough that we don't need to rely on others or can't, we will be able to shed all pretense of cordiality." A storm was brewing in the Stone Pass. Even in a secret room in the city, the spies who had plotted against Kant were also discussing this topic. The spy leader seemed to be digesting the information carefully. After hearing the report, he made a decision in his heart. "Don't be rash." The 5 spies looked at him in confusion. The spy leader limped up and waved at them. "You can leave now. Remember not to be rash and continue to lurk. What happens next is not something you can get involved in." Yes, the 5 spies left the secret room. The leader of the spies pushed the door open and entered another room. He took out the crystal ball again. As the light bloomed, a mysterious connection appeared. "Chirf, is there anything that you need to report to the Lord Count? I want to inform you that you have been using the magic crystal ball to communicate quite frequently recently. I remember that I once said that you can just send letters to report the ordinary things." A cold female voice sounded from within the crystal ball. The leader of the spies quickly replied humbly, "I have important news to report." "Speak," the female voice was still cold. Swallowing his saliva, the leader of the spies quickly reported Kant's matter. He also pointed out that Baron Dylan had recently developed the table salt trade and his strength had increased rapidly. He also guessed the relationship between the two of them and the source of the table salt trade. "Is that all?" the female voice answered coldly. "Continue to monitor. I will report this news to the Lord Count." After the female voice finished speaking, the crystal ball immediately dimmed. It was obvious that the other party had cut off the connection. The spy leader's face carried a hint of humiliation. He snorted coldly and turned around to leave.